There are a whole bunch of lessons in leadership that one can learn from Moses, who certainly is the preeminent human figure of the last 4 books of the Torah. One of the immediate lessons we learn is a leader has to have courage. And the very incident with which Moses sort of enters our consciousness once he grows up is when he steps forward, he sees a Jew being beaten by an Egyptian overseer, and he stops the overseer. He kills the man, but that's the only way he can stop him from beating the defenseless slave. Later we learn that Moses intervenes when he sees an injustice being committed, a different type of injustice. He sees the shepherdess daughters of Midian being mistreated by the male shepherds of Midian. And so Moses steps forward. There are a lot of lessons to be learned, and there's a third instance also recorded early in chapter 2 that he intervenes when he sees 2 Hebrews fighting with each other. And they berate him for intervening. They said, "Who made you Lord and Master over us?" And so we learn a few things from Moses. One thing we learn is a good leader has a multiplicity of responses available. There's not always one way to respond to a situation. I forget who it was. I think it was R.D. Lang, the psychologist, who said something to the effect, when the only tool you have available is a hammer, every problem tends to present itself as a nail. But a smart leader knows different ways to really deal with it. What do I mean by that? When he sees the overseer whipping and lashing the slave, he realizes this requires force. When the 2 Hebrews are fighting with each other, he tries to reconcile them through the use of words. He doesn't have a lot of success, which might explain why later on Moses first turns down God's request that he become a leader and says, "I'm not a man of words," because he had a bad experience with it. Later on, when the daughters of Midian are being mistreated by the male shepherds of Midian, all he has to do is stand up. He doesn't have to throw a punch. Sometimes just standing up will chase bullies away. We learn other lessons of leadership from Moses. One of them is a true leader is not only concerned about his own people. If the only story we knew about Moses was the story of how he intervened when the Hebrew slave was being beaten, we might conclude from that Moses was a good guy, but basically a Jewish nationalist. He was upset when he saw a Jew being mistreated. But we then see that he intervenes when 2 Jews are acting irresponsibly, and he intervenes when the non-Jewish male shepherds of Midian are unfairly treating the non-Jewish female shepherds of Midian. In other words, a true prophet and a good leader is concerned about all sorts of injustice. In the 4th book of the Torah, which is called Bamidbar, which means in the desert, but in English is translated as Numbers, in chapter 12 we're told Moses was the humblest man of his time, which is remarkable. Here was Moses who had such exposure to God, an ongoing relationship with God, and yet he had great humility. And part of the reason was there's a distinction between humility and low self-esteem. People sometimes confuse the two, and Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky has done path-breaking work on showing how different the two are. If you can do something, then humility is not going to intimidate you and stop you from doing it. It's low self-esteem that'll do that. How do we know that Moses had humility but not low self-esteem? Because when the time came for him to appear before Pharaoh, here was this most humble man of his time was able to go before this very mighty king and say to him, "Shalach et ami v'yavduni," let my people go that they may worship me. So humility did not intimidate him from doing what needed to be done. Just one chapter later, in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, we learn about the spies who were sent to spy out the land of Canaan, and they come back with a message that terrifies all the ancient Israelites. The people there are giants, they're going to destroy us, everything, we will be defeated. But the key to what was behind their fear was verse 33. They suffered from low self-esteem, because in that verse it says, we were like chagavim. We were like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and that's how we appeared to them. When you see yourself as a grasshopper, don't get upset at other people for seeing you like that as well. So a leader has to be humble, because otherwise he'll take advantage of his leadership position and do things for his own good. Moses was able to be humble because he recognized he didn't judge himself in comparison to other people. He was superior to them in many ways. He judged himself in comparison to God and the tasks God had set for him on this earth. So these are just a number of the lessons. There are more to be learned from Moses, but this is a number of them. The need for courage, the need to fight injustice, the need for humility, to recognize that all injustice is offensive to God, whether it's done by a non-Jew to a Jew, whether it's done by a Jew to another Jew, whether it's done by a non-Jew to yet another non-Jew. And perhaps as important to all those others is to have flexibility in your responses. The worst sort of leader is a leader who only knows one way to respond, whether it be through physical force or whether it be through reaching a reconciliation. There are times when reconciliation is very important, and there are times when physical force is important. Moses teaches us that there are a variety of responses, and he would call upon the response that was appropriate to the situation. That shows real leadership because it shows such a profound understanding of human nature and of the demands that ethics really make of us.